Today, guys, we are going to be jumping off of
Yes. Welcome to the third episode of Jumping Off Points, the podcast where we use current events to explore politics and culture.
Whoa, yes.
I almost did it again there.
I think you wanted to do it.
Because
Probably because the last one went down so nicely.
So, my name's Aidan. I'm here with Timber. How are you, Timber?
Yes. I'm very good, man. Had a very, very nice weekend on the back of some news of politics changing in England. Although the winds have changed for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, the winds of change. Sweet, very sweet in the air.
Mm.
So our episode today will be focused on the UK's local elections that happened just recently. And we're going to look at what those elections were, what led up to those elections in terms of announcements and policies and scandals that influenced people's votes, and what the results were and what we predict those results might mean for the future of politics. Should we do the music like...
So basically, local elections in the UK, it's people's opportunity to decide who represents them in their local constituency. These are not national level elections. They're people deciding who's responsible for running their community services, taking their bins out, working on local transport issues, that sort of thing.
The UK's political system is very difficult to understand. Like, it's one of those classic British things where it's a combination of loads of different things that all took place in the Middle Ages, and we've just sort of like updated them as we've gone along. We've never had like one event, like for example in the US where they have a formal written constitution that was like the start of their democracy. We've never had one event like that. So we've just had all these little pockets of power that we've formalized and developed over the years. And that means that there's so many different tiers and levels of local government.
If you look at a map of the local election results from last week, you'll notice, for example, that it's not a full map of England. And that's because due to this cobbled together system that Aidan just described, it's not all the seats that are turning over. It's some seats in some councils. Some places are not, that they don't even have local elections in this last cycle.
The councils that were contested recently on the 5th of May was all the council seats in Scotland, all the council seats in Wales, quite a lot of the council seats in London. And then in some rural places in England, there were council seats being contested, but generally it wasn't the whole council. It was only like a third of the seats, which just makes it even more confusing because I think those places have local elections like almost every year. It's just that there's different seats up for election each year, which just must be a nightmare for the people who live there.
All of them are sitting in those offices being like, oh, I'm really going to miss a third of my colleagues when they change hands. They were real joy to have around.
That's true. A high turnover, a high staff turnover in the rural local councils.
First rule of local council politics, don't make friends.
Yeah. And I think it's worth saying as well that the seats that were up for election this time, they're all councils that were elected 4 years ago. And I just want to touch on maybe the most important thing that councils do, which is housing. So if you live in social housing, like subsidized or paid for by the state, your landlord is often the local council or someone else that they've contracted to provide housing for you. And they do a lot of important work around like preventing home. I mean, obviously, sometimes they don't do it well, but part of their responsibilities are preventing homelessness and looking after people who have, I guess, complex needs, like people who are victims of domestic abuse, etc. Like they have a responsibility for those people, basically.
So a lot of important services hinge on the way the money is allocated. Comes back to what we said before, right?
Yeah, exactly. And my interpretation is that Labour councils are more pro-social housing, so they're more likely to build council housing than more right-wing councils are, I guess.
So that's what local elections are, and the reasons why people should be invested in what happens in their constituencies on a local level. But the other thing that you get from local elections is a temperature check of the national mood. So although, as we've mentioned, the things that local councils do are those sort of community level funding and services, whenever we come out of a local election like this, if the Conservatives have lost seats, that kind of shows you that people are unhappy about the way they're leading on a national level in terms of policy and the decisions they've made.
Yeah, I think it's I think you can read too much into the results of the local elections, because obviously people are voting for their local councillors who are different people. But also most people aren't particularly in tune with what's happening in their local politics because it's not on the news. Like, you'd have to be basically going out of your way to look for that information. I think most people just vote based on their overall political beliefs. That's basically what I did.
Yeah, same. I'm not a busybody. Hermione Granger looking into local council issues. If that was a bit cruel to people who are into local council.
There are definitely busybodies. It's hard to deny that, but yeah. So now we're going to have a look at what the main events, scandals, announcements, policies were that we think influenced how people voted on the 5th of May.
An issue that is a pressing one, not obviously just in England, but all over the globe, is inflation.
Inflation is basically the rate at which prices are rising. So prices for stuff are basically always rising in an inflationary economic model, which is what basically all the Western countries have. And it's measured as a percentage. And currently, the rate of inflation in the UK is 7%. And that means that in a 1 year period, prices of goods, services, etc., on average, will be 7% more expensive after that year is up. And the rate of inflation that the Bank of England wants is 2%. So we're significantly above 2% now. We're at 7%. And the Bank of England have estimated that we're going to hit 10% by the end of the year. So not only are prices rising, but the rate at which the prices are rising is increasing. It's like accelerating. The 7% inflation is an average. Some people will be hit much harder than 7% than others. And generally, poor people will be hit harder than everyone else because people who have a bit more money who might buy middle range products will simply start buying the cheaper version of those products. Poor people already buy the cheapest version of stuff. So there's nowhere for them to go. So they have to keep buying exactly the same products, but they're getting more expensive. So it's the cost of living crisis is much harder for people at the bottom end of the income spectrum.
So the combination of that having a real life sort of cost implication attached to it and knowing it's not going to get better before this time next year is a massive concern for the vast majority of voters. As you've said, it's not going to have as big a effect on richer people who've got more money to spend, but everyone's feeling it.
Do you think you'll downgrade your beer choices to pinch the
I'll have
pennies? You have to move down from Budweiser to Foster's or something.
I'll have to go from drinking nice beer to Green King. That's going to really upset me. It's going to really upset me. I fucking hate Green King so much. So basically, I drink Budweiser the most often. That's my beer of choice. And I haven't noticed a change in price.
Do you always buy from the same place, though? Is it always the same price when you buy it? It's not something you notice, really, is it?
I don't even notice. I go in, and if I spend a tenner and I get some pounds back, I think that's gone well. That's a good transaction.
And you're buying one beer. And
I hand over the note, and if some pounds are coming back into my hand, I'm like, this is a great deal.
What inflation? What inflation are you talking about?
The supermarket cashier is like, oh, I forgot I was dealing with a business guru. You, sir, are made of stronger stuff than 99% of the customers who come in here. And I'm like, thank you. Please buy my book, Business Secrets of the Pharaoh.
So, yeah, I'd probably rank that as the most important issue for voters going into that election, the cost of living crisis. Number 2, I think, is probably Partygate. And I think our UK listeners will probably already know all about this. Basically, the Conservative government, who have been in power all throughout the COVID pandemic, it was basically revealed that they had been not strictly following the lockdown laws that they implemented to deal with the pandemic. And there were quite a lot of parties in 10 Downing Street, which is where the Prime Minister lives and works. And the London Metropolitan Police Service are investigating all these parties to figure out if there was any law breaking. And so far, there have been over 50 fines handed out to people who attended the parties, including one each to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, who've both had to apologise. And there were a lot of calls for them to resign, but they've stuck it out. They've kept that. They've kept a very stoic attitude and stayed in office for all of us British people, which has been. I'm incredibly thankful for that.
Well, I think this is why it was such a big deal. Is that it's hard to think back, but when you hear a story like we did about Boris Johnson being at these parties that were attended by numerous people, so it's not even like a COVID-safe environment. You think back to the times that you, for example, couldn't go and see your friends. I know that people, it was a time when lots of people's relatives were going into hospital and they had to make a really difficult decision, which was, do I try and go and see my relative who's in hospital, which you wouldn't be allowed in if you got to the hospital and break lockdown, or do I just sit on my hands at home? And they were doing it in service of, really the greater good for the society. I think all of us didn't see all of our friendship group, right? We didn't hang out for a year and a half.
Yeah.
I have a very, very bubbly social life. I'm I do a lot of stuff, and
Tim goes out once a fortnight.
I couldn't attend my local Dungeons and Dragons meetup for a period of over 2 years. I still haven't gone back. I don't know how my mage is doing. I don't know if that's still. I don't know if the party still remembers me.
The supermarket cashier who sells you those 3 beers for a tenner is completely bereft.
He has no idea how I'm getting on. And yeah, so basically, it was the hypocrisy. I think
these Tory politicians were going on national TV every few days, doing press conferences, urging people, saying stay at home, but to know that those same people who are saying that stuff were all partying in Downing Street is pretty crazy.
And it gave everyone around England the opportunity to use that phrase that they always say, it's one rule for us and another one for them. So it's like Russell Brand voice. They don't care about you. A lot of MPs would have been following the rules, but it's it's the rank hypocrisy of the situation.
And a lot of those MPs, even Tory MPs, have called for Boris Johnson to resign over this. It was taken very seriously, when it all came out.
So we're still waiting to hear the outcome of that stuff. But that almost, we know, don't we? That had a really, really big effect on the way people perceived the Tory party and the way they voted in this election.
I think, a lot of the less ardent Tory voters would have been very put off by that.
So there were other issues feeding into this local election, which we don't want to go into massive detail on, but worth mentioning as they are part of the national conversation, which to larger and smaller degrees may have influenced some people's voting choice. So the first one being the Conservative plan to send all refugees to Rwanda.
They basically announced a deal with Rwanda to fly people who arrive in the UK by crossing the Channel over to Rwanda so that they can seek asylum there. Basically, that means that we wouldn't be accepting any refugees who arrived that way in the UK, which is probably illegal. There is a legal challenge being raised to this.
The way they phrased it was all people who arrive illegally to the UK, which I find mad in any case, because the asylum seeking process is you arrive, you fill out an asylum claim. That's part of our law. So I don't know how one illegally arrives. You'd have to assume that they know that they're not going to fill out asylum papers and just run off into Shropshire. Which I don't. I've always found it a bit slightly strange wording, but there you go.
Conservative pundits were quick to claim that when they'd introduced this scheme, it had sufficiently deterred people because there was a lull in people coming across in these small boats. But since then, hundreds of people have continued to make the journey. Nigel Farage has continued to make his videos of selfie phone position with
protector of the coast.
Yeah. So I don't know. Let's see how that works out.
So the Rwanda plan, something that might discourage more left-wing voters, but may also spur on more hard right-wing voters.
Basically, they announced this plan that they were going to ship all these migrants off to Africa, like just before the pre-election period, or like just on the first day. And basically the pre-election period is the month before an election, where the political party in power aren't allowed to announce new policies because they have such a wide reach. Like, because they're already in government, they obviously get a lot more attention than opposition parties. So they basically announced this at the very last possible time when they could, before the election. So to me, it looked like it was very much done in order to improve their chances at the local elections with their right-wing voters who care a lot about immigration, basically.
It's called Purda, isn't it?
I think it used to be called Purda. Now it's just called the pre-election period.
And so the other scandal we had in the national news leading into the election wasn't really a singular scandal, but more like a tsunami of different scandals, all pointing in a similar direction.
Since the autumn of 2021, the government and Parliament and the Conservatives have been plagued with quite a lot of sleaze scandals where MPs have been shown to not be behaving in a way that we consider to fit public office. And so we've seen sexual harassment. We've seen one Tory MP being prosecuted for groping a 15-year-old child. We've seen someone watching porn in the House of Commons.
In the company of two people, like two women, who could see that he was watching porn on separate occasions, as it turns out.
So basically, for anyone who hasn't been following the porn story, I really recommend that you look into it, because it is just amazing. Like when he was found out, like when it came out that this guy Neil Parish had been watching porn in the House of Commons, his excuse was that he'd been looking up tractors online and ended up on the wrong website with a similar URL. And it's like, what? And so the memes started flying of like tractors having sex with each other and stuff. That was a fun day for me on Twitter, I have to say.
The tractor website was on as like Spin Me Daddy. But yeah, he said like he gave an excuse that was like David Brent from The Office stumbling through a similar situation. It was sort of like, so I made a mistake, which was that I accidentally was on this tractor website and I accidentally clicked through onto a porn website. But the mistake I made that I will apologize for is that I stayed on the porn website and then revisited the porn website on another occasion.
Because it happened twice, didn't it? Like it happened once in the House of Commons and once like in a like parliamentary scrutiny meeting or something. It's
so in that story, it's like he is someone who doesn't really know what porn is, and he stumbles onto it. He's like, oh, well, this is beguiling.
Well, this is interesting.
What is this,
guys? Have you seen this?
Have you seen this on the internet? And then he goes back on another day. He's like, oh, how beguiling, how befuddling, how. What am I watching on my screen? Like in the story, he's literally someone who is like, he's an alien who doesn't know about human stuff that exists in the world, and he's just endlessly baffled by coming across things on the internet, which is funny.
If you're one of the people who actually has to work with him, not funny, very gross and creepy, but but just the story for the wider population did make it quite funny, I have to say. There are some that we haven't even touched on. There was a Conservative MP who was accused of sexual harassment and also photographed with a baking tray with loads of cocaine on it. So there have been quite a few resignations recently for these scandals. Basically, a lot of these MPs have been Tory MPs. So it's just contributed to this sense that they don't have the right morals to be leading the country. They're not taking it seriously. They're unserious, bad people, basically. So I think a lot of Conservative voters...
I think moderate suburban voters would probably be impacted by this.
Like the rest of us found it just to be gross and odd.
Yeah. So those were the issues that we had that were kind of, I suppose, none of them in and of themselves decisive in terms of picking a political party, but all having an effect here, and all having effects which were negative for Conservatives, as it turns out. So in terms of what people's expectations were for this election, it was widely expected that Tories would lose seats, not just because of everything that we've mentioned in terms of the scandals, but also it's generally expected the party in power will lose seats during the midterms. People are not as fired up to support a party in power as they are to protest a party in power. So, in any local election, you're going to see them lose seats. Bearing all that in mind, people wanted to quantify what success and failure would look like for the Tory party. So what it was forecast was if they lost between 100 and 150 seats, that would be seen as something that Tories could write off as midterm blues. It would still indicate they're doing pretty well and on track for a general election victory, because it's just not the kind of level of loss that would cause them to lose in a general. If Tories were to lose 350 seats or over, that would be a disaster for the Tories. That would be
a scathing indictment of their terribleness.
Yeah, once you get over 350 losses, you are getting into the realm of, well, that's actually a very, very powerful protest vote against the Tories and an indication that people aren't happy with what's going on. So that really doesn't bode well in the next general, if they're seeing that level of losses of seats across all these different constituencies.
And part of that is because the Tory councillors who would lose their seats are very important community activists and people who get out the vote at general elections. So if you're a Tory MP in one of these places where all the Tory councillors have lost their seats, that's really bad for you, because it means that those Tory councillors are not having a big enough sway with all the people that you're going to rely on for votes at the next general election. So those people are thinking, my job is in danger at the next general election. So it's very bad, basically, for Tories. In the few weeks before the election, what you always get in UK politics, and I'm sure this happens in other countries as well, but before the local elections, you get a lot of expectation management, because what really matters is what you can say after the election about what the results were. So Tories, like Conservative Press Office, were saying to journalists, oh, we're really worried. We think we might lose. We think it's going to be a disaster. We might lose 800 council seats, which would be completely insane. Like 800 council seats is so many council seats. And so basically, I think the aim of that is so that after the election, if they only lost 200, they could say, oh my God, look how much better than we thought we were going to do. The people are behind us, we just got to keep on doing what we're doing because people are actually kind of behind us. We lost a few because it's the midterm election, but we're doing okay. And then in response to that, the Labour's press office was saying, you have to remember that these seats that are being contested now aren't being tested from the general election when the Tories smashed Labour. They're being contested from when Labour were also in a really strong position.
Yeah, the expectation management thing, I often do it with our podcast uploads. I'm like, I bet we'll get fucking 1 view. Oh. And then when I get like 5, I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. It's like over 5 times the amount. That's insane. I should give up my day job now, actually. This is going doing numbers.
And then you take that to your other friends and you're like, yeah, so we were only expecting a couple of views. We got like 10.
I went into this election, I'd already read that 350 losses as a disaster figure. I had that in my head. And so I went to bed on Thursday night thinking of, well, the Tories have actually stayed the course on far worse situations in the past. So I was kind of thinking that they actually might come out of this okay. And that 100 to 150 figure, I was thinking was the most likely outcome. Woke up on Thursday, early results came in, and it looked like they'd lost, at that point, maybe they'd lost 50 seats. Labour had picked up maybe 20. Other centre-left parties had gained some. And throughout the day, I kept checking the tracker that was on the Guardian website. And so I saw it go to minus 100. And I was like, oh, man. Oh, geez, we're there. And it was only maybe
oh, man. Oh, geez.
It was, oh, geez. It was 30 councils declared or something. So we're way off the 200 figure. And it went to 200. And I was like, oh my God, we're getting awfully close. It went over 300. And I was like, okay, so now at this stage,
Tim was cracking open cans of Budweiser.
I could see the course, it was just accelerating the amount of losses. So 2 hours after that, it was at minus 380. And I was like, well, and that we hadn't even declared all the councils. At that point, it was only 180 declared. So yeah, we were seeing this crazy, overwhelming loss slowly revealing itself. And it felt wild because I just never expected it to be that bad.
You and I are right in the pocket of being we've been following politics for a while, but never having seen a good result for us, people who don't like the Tories.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's what? the Tories can lose? That is crazy.
Well, this is the thing. It's more they've got like a crazy good approach to dealing with catastrophes. They rotate leaders in and out. They're very good at, like, for example, during this time when Boris is going through scandals, just hiding him away to the extent that the messaging that he's doing can constantly stay on non-contentious topics for Conservatives. So yeah, I was expecting them to, like, you know, open the car door, tuck and roll, stand up, like having done a full backflip and gain like maybe 50 seats. I don't know, that's kind of what I was expecting. And yeah, instead it was this scathing indictment of them on a national level.
So at the time that we're recording this podcast, which is on Sunday morning, it's quite difficult to tell the final results because different news outlets are reporting it slightly differently. We're going to assume that the Tories have lost approximately 450 seats. We're taking that as an average of seeing 400 and somewhere 500. So it's clear that they've lost a lot more than 350, possibly up to about 450 seats. And it would be a huge coincidence if all those 450 Tory councillors had just been particularly shit at their job and Tories didn't like them. I think I can be confident to say that that is a reaction to the national politics.
Yeah, and then the picture across the other parties, globally, it's a picture of centre of left parties picking up seats. So Labour have picked up, again, an average around 260 seats. Lib Dems have gained somewhere closer to 200, which was a big shock. Lib Dems, if you're not clued in with UK politics, have been largely an invisible party for the last 10 years, which weren't seen as a potent force in terms of national issues and not even on the local level. But they picked up a crazy amount of seats for being the third, the kind of third English party running.
They're a centrist party, and they fell out of favour hugely when they went into coalition with the Tories, and they basically U-turned on one of their most prominent policies, which was to scrap tuition fees, and then tuition fees went up. So they basically, everyone hated them for ages.
Not only did they not scrap it, tuition fees went from 3,000 to 9,000.
Yeah.
9,000 a year, that is. It's fucking mental.
Yeah. So they, like Tim said, they've largely been written off in recent years. But I think they've done particularly well in these local elections. And to me, it seems like that's because a lot of the moderate Tories who are sort of grossed out by Boris Johnson, the way he's carried on, all the scandals, the sort of hard rightness of the government, and they've shifted to the next best thing, which is the centrist liberal Democrats.
Also, quite a palatable party to cast your protest vote in because it's not the left-wing party, or it's not the outright left-wing party.
You don't have to be pro-nationalisation. You can just get on board with gay people being allowed to get married or whatever.
But then we also had the Green Party gaining 81 seats, which was a great result for them, and SNP, which is the Scottish National Party, gaining 62 seats. So the overall picture that formed here is a massive loss in the Tory camp, and all those seats going sporadically to different centre-of-left parties or moderate parties.
I'm reading it as a rejection of the Tories. I don't think we're at a stage yet where we can say that this is a huge celebratory moment for Labour supporters, who are obviously the main challenger to the Tories in a general election. But I think it's reassuring at least that the Tories are getting a beating.
We've seen the one point of weakness in their Death Star political party, which is the fact that they got together during lockdown and had a party in the garden. Like that. That's the one thing that can bring Tories down. Like, not the Windrush scandal. It's the fact that they breached a lockdown protocol.
It's having a party and not inviting everyone.
Yeah. I think the comment that someone made that led to this news story about there being a party was that, there was wine and cheese. And everyone was like, they're having wine and cheese. It's like, you don't even want wine and cheese. Like, no one cares about having fucking wine and cheese at a fucking party. Like, that's the most dead-ass party.
Oh, wow. Oh, they've had wine and cheese as well. Unbelievable.
Yeah. And it's like everyone's just like standing in their rave in the middle of a forest, like I want wine and cheese. They get to have that, and I'm just here with a load of people in a sound system in the middle of a field.
Imagine how differently the story would have been portrayed in the media if what they've been having was £3 cans of Budweiser. we'd have been like, whoa.
I have to have this fucking Green King beer. Ugh. 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 It's like, why are you coming into our Green King pub every week? It's like, inflation. Oh my God. I'm forced to drink these pints of horrible, what can only be described as urine water. Horrible dishwater beer. By the way, thanks to Green King for sponsoring our podcast. We appreciate you guys.
We love you guys. You guys are the best, yeah.
So basically, in terms of how this looks for electoral trends, as we've said, this is like a temperature reading ahead of what could be a potential, national election. Publications and analysis tend to do what's called a projected national vote, which is, if this local election result is to be read as what would happen at a general election, how would that look for the different parties? So it put Labour at 35% of the vote, with Conservatives on 30%, and the Liberal Democrats on 19%. So analysis from Sky News said that the same pattern in the general election would make the Conservatives the largest party on 278 seats, but 48 seats short of an absolute majority. So it would be them losing that electoral majority. Labour would then be only shortly behind them on 271 seats, and the Liberal Democrats on 28. So the swing to Labour since May 2021 has been put as 6 to 7%. There is a swing there. They're picking up more seats than they were, and it's definitely not bad news, but it's not the kind of pace that would lead you to think that they are a party that's going to storm to victory in a general election. It's worth mentioning that in 2012, we actually saw a really similar result for Labour. The Conservative Party at that time, under David Cameron, lost over 400 seats. So same, do you know what I mean? We're the exact
in the council
same
elections.
scenario in the local elections. And then he went on to win the next general election. So that should give people pause if they're right now thinking, well, this is the realignment of the political parties. This is the turning tide.
It seems clear to me that the work that needs to be done is not as simple as it used to be for the Labour Party. You can't win a general election the same way anymore because the SNP are so popular in Scotland, which used to be a big Labour stronghold, and they've lost a lot of these red wall seats. So now they need to flip different seats, or they need to work with other parties in order to get the Tories out, basically. And I also think it really highlights how the vote, like the left-wing vote, is very split. Like, we are seeing some tactical voting, which is great, but generally people on the left aren't as willing as people on the right to band together to vote for one party to get a huge majority. Like, we're all very particular about which party we want to vote for. So if the Greens, Labour, and the Liberal Democrats were all just one party, we'd be killing them in a general election right now, wouldn't we?
So on to the losers.
We've kind of discussed that the Tories have probably lost a lot of their seats to the Lib Dems as people move to a more moderate party, and that generally we can see the huge loss of Tory councillors as a sort of protest vote against the national Tory party. Interestingly, Northern Ireland also had elections on the 5th of May for the Northern Ireland Assembly, which is basically the devolved government in Northern Ireland. I'm not entirely clear on like what they have responsibility for, but it's more important than like a local council. It's like they're the government for Northern Ireland, but obviously they're still less important than the UK government in terms of wider policy. But during COVID, different places in the UK had different COVID policies and stuff, and that was set. So like Wales had a different policy and Scotland had a different policy, and those policies were set by their devolved government. So it's a very important institution, this Northern Ireland Assembly. And for the first time ever, Sinn Féin, who are a Republican centre-left party who want to see Northern Ireland reunited with the Republic of Ireland, they got the most seats in the Northern Ireland Assembly in this election, which is pretty historic. As I said, the first time it's ever happened. And that basically bodes very badly for the Tories, because a part of the Tories' messaging is that they are the party that will deliver stability for the UK by keeping Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales as part of the Union. And it looks like one of the reasons why Sinn Féin did well in Northern Ireland is because of Brexit. The constituencies in Northern Ireland voted overwhelmingly to stay in the EU in the Brexit referendum. But obviously, because the whole UK voted to leave, they left with us. And historically, there's always been a very soft border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The Tory government have gone back on promises that they made to the EU, to Northern Ireland and to Ireland about the way that they will deal with the Northern Irish and Irish border, which has upset a lot of people in Northern Ireland because their businesses will be affected. It's going to be a total shit show, basically. So I think that Sinn Féin, who are a Republican party who want to see a united Ireland, basically winning this election is hugely significant in showing the sentiment for anti-Tory, anti-Brexit politics in the UK.
And might they actually duck out of being part of England?
I don't think it's like...
Sorry, not England.
Of the UK.
UK.
Yeah. I don't think it's an imminent concern because whilst they're now the biggest party in the assembly, the majority of seats are held by unionist, but it's just that the vote is slightly split.
Yeah.
But it's still historic that they're the most popular party. And as we mentioned earlier, the SNP are the most popular party in Scotland. I think it's called Plaid Cymru. They're like the Welsh nationalist party. They did very well in these local elections. So a lot of these parties that are anti-union are doing very well at the moment, which is very bad for the Tories.
Another indicator on the mood, like surrounding Brexit as well, which is actually being pro-Brexit is one of the Tories' biggest strengths. It kind of puts them in a bit of a bind.
And being pro-Brexit is very English. It's not necessarily very Great British. It's very English. And the Tories are increasingly becoming an English party and losing a lot of support in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales.
But that's another point to make is that in past years, so over the last decade, Conservatives were always having their vote split by a far-right party called UKIP. Very much a party that was anti-immigration, anti-EU.
They were to the right of the Tories.
Tories.
Very uncontroversial to say that.
Yeah. So what we've seen since the Brexit vote is UKIP party not really having a reason to exist. We had the Brexit party in the last election, which really didn't get much of the vote at all. That was a party that was almost rose from the embers of UKIP and stated its like sort of mission statement as making sure Brexit gets delivered in X and Y ways that means that people who voted for it are getting the anti-immigration vision that we put forward that really consolidated the vote. So they didn't get any votes, and it's obviously because now the Brexit has happened, there isn't that political will,
and also because Boris Johnson's leadership is kind of that already. Like his whole thing was making sure we get a hard Brexit, making sure that we agree to ship off migrants to Africa. Like they pander to the right wing of the Conservative base anyway. So pointless having someone else is doing that.
But that's it. I think perhaps that almost makes the performance look a bit worse because they're not even competing with any other right wing parties here. As we said, they still got the majority, but you're seeing all your people with right of centre views under one umbrella, whereas, as you said, the left don't have that. So I think from that point of view, it's a bigger indictment. They're getting everyone that they can, and it still wouldn't be enough to for example, fend off the prospect of a left-wing coalition government. In terms of how like Conservatives are reacting to this, I know there's been some MPs who lost their local election through no fault of their own, of course. Like as we've mentioned, we don't think the local issues have come into it that much with the way people voted, who pretty much artfully stayed silent about Boris Johnson and Westminster. I read accounts of quite a few saying that Boris Johnson is still the man for the moment. If you say the man for the moment, it sounds like he's going to disappear at some point, and it's interpreted as like, oh, I'm going to take over from him. No, so he's still
the right man for
Boris
right
Johnson
now.
is the right man for right now. Yes, and also talk that it's not the time to talk about leaders being replaced.
There's always something too important happening to mean that they could even think about not having Boris Johnson in charge.
Yes, so some people have taken that angle where they've said tactically it's better to leave him in power anyway. We're about to go through more inflation. It doesn't make sense to put anyone else in at this time. But then you have had some Tories speaking out about the way they feel that they've been sort of cheated by Westminster and they've been really let down by the behaviour of MPs in Westminster. So the leader of Portsmouth City Council Conservative Group, who's called Simon Bosher, said, "I have to say the results have been extremely disappointing. Not totally unexpected, I have to say. We have actually lost some very good working community councillors this evening. Personally, I think those in power in Westminster really do need to take a good, hard look in the mirror, because it's the rank and file grassroots members they rely on that are actually losing their seats tonight, and it's pretty disappointing across the board." So you can feel that frustration, I think, in the fact that this has been completely out of his hands.
Obviously, I'm not a Conservative voter, but it's very possible that these community councillors are doing great casework and stuff for their local community, but they're just getting slammed because Boris Johnson's terrible.
Whenever you say, someone needs to, so as he said, they need to take a good, hard look in the mirror, it's like, it very much implies a really, really big moral failing. It goes beyond they've let us down, or it goes beyond they didn't do the work. It's the
the politician equivalent of your parents saying, "I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed."
Yeah.
And then staring at you like...
Yeah. Then we have Marcus Fish, who's the Tory MP for Yeovil, saying, "The voters have sent us a message which I, for one, have heard loud and clear. We need a radical change of approach on the economy, and I don't think the team we've got as currently constituted is capable of delivering that. We need to discuss amongst colleagues whether Boris is the right person to do that." So, straight sending for the king. Straight.
Yeah.
He's not even masking it as a condemnation of an ambiguous group. He's gunning for Boris Johnson here.
Yeah. Obviously, Boris Johnson is not thinking that he's going to resign. We'll play you a little bit of audio from an interview that Boris Johnson gave after the election.
Prime Minister,
yes.
Going into this election, you said that you would take personal responsibility for the results. Results aren't good. You've lost 120 councillors at least so far. You might end up losing 200 to 300. Flagships, Wandsworth, Westminster, Conservative councillors who are very angry at you and think you're the reason. Do you take responsibility?
Of course. And first of all, I want to pay tribute to Conservative councillors up and down the land. Conservative councillors who've won, those who have sadly lost, and they do a fantastic job, and they deliver better value for lower council tax up and down the country. Yes, you're right. It's mid-term, and it's certainly a mixed set of results. And we've had a tough night in some parts of the country, but on the other hand, in other parts of the country, you're still seeing Conservatives going forward and making quite remarkable gains in places that haven't voted Conservative for a long time, or if ever. And so, leaving aside the commentary,
so it's like, do you take responsibility for these results? Absolutely, I do take responsibility. And, it's been a tough night. It's been some mixed results. But mostly the thing I want to talk about is how great we did in the elections, because there were some places where we got councillors where we didn't think we were going to get councillors.
Also, remarkable gains, only in the sense that it was remarkable they managed to win with all the shit that you've done.
Yeah.
Only in the sense that they defied the whole national mood. That is remarkable, yes, but...
We've got some remarkably talented politicians out there who seem to be able to deal with the fact that I'm terrible. So
it's like I put the bar they had to jump over at the size of a skyscraper, and they somehow still managed to javelin jump over that. I don't know how. Do you know what I mean? That is remarkable.
And it's also I don't know how you can say it's a mixed set of results when you lost 450 seats. You can say it's not an amazing result for Labour. I think you can make that argument. It's an okay result for Labour, but you can't say it's an okay result for us. You fucked it, mate. You lost 450 seats.
Well, let's think. Let's imagine Boris asks that same question. Do you take responsibility? And he starts off in the same way, where he says, yes, of course I do. What would be the things he would say that would indicate that he's taking responsibility?
I heard Nadeem Zahawi say something along the lines of, we need to listen to the people who've basically told us with their vote that they're not happy, find out what we can do better, go and work with those local councils where we haven't done as well as we might have liked, and find out what we can do for voters. That would be taking responsibility.
So yeah, and it's I suppose to actually call out the things by name. I mean, but that's a next level of political...
I think if you do that, you're going to get skewered, aren't you? It's
yeah.
Well, obviously people hate me because I did all the partying.
No, it's just a dispassionate list. It's I had a party during lockdown. Sorry. There's a lot of like sleazy people in the Houses of Parliament who are touching up women. Sorry. I know that our policy of shipping immigrants to Rwanda is not popular with everyone. Sorry. Like, I don't know.
The thing is, the list, I don't think there's a news segment long enough to have a list of everything in there. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
And he was also, I mean, it's interesting. So in that clip that we watched, he was actually in a school at the time that he got the results. And that's quite a savvy move in itself, I suppose, of maneuvering, of, you know, at the point where everyone is focused on the election, he's put himself in a sort of community environment, as if to show, I'm not really bothered about the election. I'm here.
I'm getting on with the
people
job.
of my country. I'm getting on with the job. You know, you can see the planning that's gone into that of having him there to hear the results and to give his little soundbite excerpt.
Mm. And to be honest, what I've just played is basically the extent of what I've seen him say about the local election, which is kind of crazy considering he's the leader of the Conservative Party and they just got worked in an election. Like, you'd think there'd be more of a statement than that, but that's basically all he said. He basically didn't say anything.
There's quite a lot of Conservatives going in, certainly when Boris Johnson was being suggested for the leadership, that didn't think he could lead. And I think
I wonder why they thought that.
Well, I think it was a quote from Ken Clark, who was the area I used to live in Notts. He said, "Do you think Boris Johnson's the right person to run the Tory party?" And then Ken Clark was like, "Boris Johnson couldn't even run a Welk store." And it's a very Tory thing to say because I don't know what a Welk store is.
What is a Welk?
I was thinking of the Welk, like the elk, which is like a deer creature, and him organising a store that is like for antlers and things. But...
Oh wait, okay. It's like an old phrase. Unable to run a Welk stall is it means to be incapable of managing the simplest task or enterprise. But so it's like the posh version of couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery.
Yeah,
that's what it says. But I still don't know what a Welk is.
It's like lots of posh words in there. He couldn't even organise an embottling in a Welk store. Yeah, that's really tough. I get what he's talking about. But yeah, so they going in, like, Conservatives were thinking he wasn't, you know, the right person to lead the party. They were then sort of, I think the 2019 election was a glowing appraisal of him as the right person. He was the Brexit guy. Brexit was the powerful issue. And I think now it's sort of maybe, you know, I think he proved everyone wrong in that election. But now it's like, okay, we're back to where we were. Because
his style is you never acknowledge or apologise for anything bad. You have this...
it's a blustering approach, isn't it?
Yeah, like untarnishable optimism so that you never let the voters see any weakness. And for people who don't really care, that seems to work massively. Because, like, all these stories we talk about MPs behaving badly, blah, 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 all the things that get through to people who read the news, most people never even probably hear about them. Like, some people, the extent to which they follow politics is so minimal, isn't it? That, like, just having someone who's, like, quite good crack and, like, you know, is always optimistic about what's happening, that probably does it.
Well, it is true, because I think so even in that clip that we showed, you kind of want some sort of reaction. You kind of want to see something from him that goes with the results you've heard. Really, really bad result, and you almost like it's a strange disconnect when you see the person who's in charge of that party talking about how well they've done.
Yeah.
And it sort of does work to wipe the slate clean. You then don't really have any impression of how he feels.
Well, it's then hard to say you should change what you're doing because you've got bad election results.
Because he's spinning it as a success.
Because he's not even accepting he's got bad election results. Yeah, so it's not you can't take him down with just a good argument.
Yeah, it's really true, because he very seamlessly transitioned into, like, the remarkable gains thing, which I think it's going to be true of any election. You're going to pick up some seats, right?
Yeah.
But he almost could have said that regardless of what happened.
He probably wrote it before.
That speech, could have been written, like, but we've made, because he didn't even specify.
Yeah.
He just said, we've made remarkable gains in some areas which Conservatives weren't expected to win. It's like, where? Because I think in every area, that people are talking about, which, you were expected to win, Wandsworth, Westminster, you've lost, and it's been really surprising.
Well, I think they did win. Like, they gained some seats in some London boroughs and stuff that people didn't expect them to. But yeah, compared to the overall picture on the national level, it's nothing really.
So that's how things are looking now after the local election in the UK. Very, very big loss for Conservatives. Some quite notable pickups for centre of left parties. In terms of like how this will map onto a national election, when will the next national election be? Do we know that? That's interesting to mention.
Well, the way it works in the UK is the government can call one basically whenever they want, but the next time it'll be forced, I think it's in 2024. Let me check it though.
It's in 2025. The next one.
Okay, so it's every 5 years, isn't it? Is that right? It's every 5 years, and the last one was in 2019. And so no later than January 2025.
Realistically, it'll probably be earlier.
It'll realistically be earlier because they always, if you leave it to the last possible moment, you have no control over how well you're doing in the polls at that moment. Whereas if you call it at a time when things are looking slightly better for you, then you're obviously more likely to do well in the election. I have even seen like some articles suggesting that Boris Johnson was thinking about calling it quite soon because the economic situation is only going to get worse, and I think they're sort of weighing up the balance of, will it have got better by early 2025, or is it only going to get worse from here on out until that time? And if it's only going to get worse, then they might as well do the election soon before all that stuff really kicks in badly.
All of the events we talked about in this podcast, the sleaze scandals, the Rwanda policy, that all happened literally in the last month. Like, do you know what I mean? A really, really short time frame. There's no way to predict where the national mood will be in 2 years' time. Labour are going to hope that this is like the turning of the tide against the Tories in the way they've been able to dominate through their Brexit mandate. But it's clear that they've still got a lot of work to do in between now and when we will have the next general election, so it doesn't pan out the same way it did with Tories' loss in 2012 at the local elections, which still led to a big Conservative victory in the following years.
I'm feeling a little gust of optimism this week. It's good. It's nice to have a win. You know what I mean?
Little win, yeah.
Little win.
True.
It's nice to have a little win as a treat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If we say a funny word, when I'm editing it afterwards, I can like make the soundtrack swell at the same time as we say it.
What?
Jumping off of jumping off of